What's up, guys? So Blizzard just dropped a new set of class tuning changes coming tomorrow, I believe. Yeah, these changes will go live beginning on December 12th as of the weekly maintenance. Uh, and there's some pretty exciting things to unpack here, so I want to kind of run through that. So first off, we see Druids getting a Star Surge buff. The ability damage increased by 182%, cooldown reduced by 6 seconds, formerly was 10 seconds, and the mana cost being reduced to 1%. Now, these are big changes for Druid. If we hop over to the damage breakdown in Blackfathom Deeps, we see balanced Druids are not having a great time right now. So definitely think this is a much needed change. I've heard through the grapevine that Star Surge, as of recently, just hasn't been a good press. So hopefully this makes balanced Druid a little bit more viable. Hunters, we see Flanking Strike now gains the benefit of weapon enhancements like Sharpening Stones, is on global cooldown, and is now properly treated as a melee attack, letting it benefit from attack power and combat modifiers to dodge parry. Okay, interesting. So I guess previously Flanking Strike was just a flat damage based ability that didn't scale. So they've since changed that. That definitely seems like it's good. It's now prevented by Pacify. Okay, so you could previously use Flanking Strike while pacified. Interesting. That requires a weapon equipped, okay. And Flanking Strike pet damage is now properly treated as a melee attack. Same benefits listed above for Hunter's damage. Alright, so this seems to be like quality of life changes to the Hunter playstyle, specifically the melee Hunter playstyle, now that Flanking Strike is a kind of properly scaling ability. And additional changes to normalize Hunter pet performance are still to be determined. Okay, so this is an interesting one, because there have been a lot of memes in my guild's Discord talking about the Scorpion and how much damage they're dealing right now. So I guess that's still in the works. But it's cool to see that there's something on the way. Like there's a fix kind of being worked on and in progress. So that's good news. If you're a melee hunter enjoyer, this is probably good news. Definitely doesn't seem like as strong as a buff as, say, what Druids are getting. But this probably enables melee hunter to be a bit more viable of an option. Moving on to Priest. We see Homunculi damage increased by 100%, Void Plague damage increased by 200%, and Twisted Faith now increases damage done by Mind Blast and Mind Flay by 50%. Was 20% on targets afflicted with Shadow Word Pain. Okay, so this is awesome. The reason this is awesome is because the only class currently lower than Balanced Druid is DPS Priests, particularly any Shadow enjoyers. So Shadow Priests, this is a much needed change. We'll have to wait and see exactly what this does to their damage profile. I mean, I don't think this bumps it to the top, but this should definitely move it further to the right and hopefully make it a bit better option for any players that want to play Shadow. Now, increasing damage by 100% is great, but Homunculi is also a pretty gimmicky mechanic. Like sometimes the ads just won't attack the mob. So I think it would be awesome if Blizzard could like maybe target that. Maybe it's in the form of giving priests some authority over their pets, right? Maybe it becomes a pet you can control for the 2 minutes that they last. Just because there have been situations, at least of players I've played with, where 2 of the 3 homunculi will just stand there and not do anything. So, but I think this is a good start. Moving on to rogues then. So we see Saber Slash, Shiv, and Main Gauche will now properly consume remorseless attacks. So previously they weren't. After killing an opponent that yields blah, 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 you get 40% increased critical strike chance. Okay, so this is definitely a nerf, but fixing a mechanic as it's supposed to be intended, that would make remorseless attacks very good for leveling if this didn't get consumed. Saber Slash's tooltip fixed, damage not reduce. Okay. And Saber Slash damage is now properly considered a bleed and benefits from the Mangle debuff. Note, bleed immune creatures will no longer be affected by it. Okay, so this is both a buff and a nerf to the class, but really they're just fixing mechanics to work the way they are supposed to. So as a rogue, you're kind of just chilling. You're already a pretty strong DPS class, so rogues are feeling all right. Shamans, Lava Lash damage increased to 150% weapon damage, was 100%. Lava Lash mana cost reduced to 1% of base mana, was 4. Overload now has a 50% chance to trigger, was 33. And dual wield specialization now grants 10% increased chance to hit while dual wielding. Okay, so this is a big buff to DPS shamans. which I tend to think is relatively justified. If we look here on Warcraft logs, we see both elemental and enhancement kind of towards the bottom. In particular, enhancement in the physical DPS meta is the one physical DPS or melee class that really is not having a good time right now. So this definitely seems like good balancing changes. Nothing too extreme, right? Similar to the case of Shadow Priest. I don't think this is going to move Shaman to the top of the meters, but hopefully it makes these classes feel a bit better to play. And finally, we have Boon of Blackfathom. So the world buff has been adjusted. It now provides 3% spell hit and 25 spell power buff, in addition to the other physical damage and movement speed effects. Was previously spell crit. Developers note, spellcasters in general are struggling a bit in BFD, mostly due to poor scaling without spell power and a higher requirement of spell hit to reliably hit creatures 2 or more levels above the caster. Keep those chrono booms handy and don't stand the fire and lose your buff. Okay. So I love this buff. Love this change to Boon of Blackfathom. Previously, it was just spell crit. Like, that was the only benefit that casters would gain from Boon of Blackfathom. And depending on what class you played, like if you were basically any caster class that uses dots really didn't get much value out of this buff because your dots can't crit. And especially with the current meta, which is a physical DPS meta, casters were really struggling. And I actually was working on a video talking about this when these changes came out. But to sort of summarize, there are two big issues in the game right now with casters. And those two issues are, one, casters don't have enough mana to reliably spend over the course of an encounter. For basically all casters, there are periods where you are forced to regen, whether that's through wanding or just standing there and waiting for your mana to start ticking back up, right? Because at this level bracket, casters don't have the tools or talents or gear necessary to be able to sustain over the course of an entire encounter. The second kind of issue here is that during their windows where they're actually spending resources, right? So they're using their mana to do damage, that damage just isn't enough. Whether it's because they're being resisted or the abilities are undertuned or whatever, during those windows of spending resources, for casters to be a successful class, they need to do more damage than the average DPS player. Because when playing a caster in Classic, you generally are forced to play around regenning, whether it's a mage wanding or a warlock pressing life tap. The idea behind playing a caster class and what makes their damage meaningful is that during those windows of spending, they should, on average, do more damage. But in the current state of the game, that's just not the case. I can pull up a log here if we go to my guild's last run here, last run I did. A good example of this is Lady Cerebus. So, what was this? December 10th. So Lady Cerebus is a fast fight. Lasted 30 seconds of boss time. And the logic here is that because this fight is so quick, if I begin the fight as a warlock with full mana, I shouldn't need to press life tap at all because the boss will die before my mana reaches 0, which is good for my damage profile. But even with that, I'm still dealing significantly less damage than all of our physical DPS classes. So them changing the BFD buff to also support casters here and specifically granting them spell power and spell hit, I think is a good step in this direction. It'll make their windows of spending more meaningful. Doesn't really solve the mana problem. I don't necessarily think the solution for caster classes is to give all of them infinite mana. I think part of the charm of playing caster in Classic is having to play around your mana pools. But if that's the direction that Blizzard decides to take casters in Season of Discovery, it's important that when they have their damage windows, those windows need to be meaningful and do damage. Otherwise, why would you bring casters to your raid? A final note here that I almost missed on the bottom. Regarding the Hunter pet performance above, we will let you know as soon as we finalize this hotfix. We really like Hunter pets being able to occasionally do some raid or dungeon tanking, but it was never intended for them to be the best tanks in the game. Yeah, Hunter pets are very strong tanks right now, specifically for anything single target like bosses. They're great for taunt swaps. They have more health than any real tanks in the game, right? Any non-pet tanks for that matter. I think this is good. I also think it would be a bit awkward if Hunter Pets were just like the ultimate tank class. So, but that summarizes all the changes that we've gotten for this week. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.